What's the hardest family conversation you've never had?
I can still vividly recall the precise instant when my phone vibrated insistently on the cluttered kitchen counter of my modest Milwaukee apartment, displaying that fateful group chat message from my mother, whose words dripped with the kind of calculated caution she had perfected over decades of mediating our family's endless undercurrents of resentment and unspoken grudges, warning me in no uncertain terms that my attendance at Sarah's wedding 2 weeks hence in the opulent Chicago ballroom, complete with its glittering chandeliers, meticulously arranged floral centerpieces, and a guest list bloated with distant relatives eager to play at being socialites, would inevitably unleash a torrent of drama that could overshadow the entire celebration, particularly since my previous outbursts, like the one at Uncle Ted's retirement party where I had dared to question his dubious real estate dealings that left several neighbors in financial ruin, had branded me forever as the black sheep who shattered the fragile peace everyone else pretended to cherish. As I stood there, the steam from my now lukewarm mug of black coffee curling lazily upward, while the afternoon light filtered through the half-drawn blinds casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors, a wave of profound hurt mingled with simmering anger coursed through me, because Sarah, my younger sister by a mere 3 years, and the one person who should have understood the raw edges of my life after our shared childhood in that stifling Ohio suburb where we had huddled together, against our parents' expectations, had remained conspicuously silent in the thread, likely too ensnared in the whirlwind of her bridal preparations and the intoxicating illusion of marital bliss with Mark, her groom, that polished accountant whose disarming grin concealed a volatility I had glimpsed during their engagement dinner when he had barked sharply at a harried server over a minor mix-up with the wine order, his cheeks flushing with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, though no one else at the table seemed to register it amid the clinking glasses and forced laughter, dismissing it perhaps as the harmless stress of planning a union meant to elevate our family's status in their eyes. My parents, ever the architects of superficial harmony, had long favored Sarah's compliant demeanor over my tendency to voice uncomfortable truths, a dynamic that had only intensified since my own divorce 5 years earlier, when I had uncovered my ex-husband's infidelity and laid it bare during a heated family gathering, only to be painted as the unstable instigator who had torpedoed a perfectly viable marriage, leaving me to rebuild my life as Emily Harper, the 42-year-old freelance graphic designer scraping by on irregular commissions for local businesses while nursing the isolation that came from being the outspoken outlier in a clan that prized conformity above all. In that moment of digital confrontation, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to unleash a retort laced with sarcasm about how I would graciously spare them my disruptive presence by opting for a solitary evening with takeout pizza and a mindless streaming marathon. But instead, I composed a terse reply, understood, I won't be attending, and dispatched it before silencing the notifications entirely, unwilling to let their judgments fester any longer in my already crowded mind, though a nagging whisper at the edges of my thoughts wondered if they might have a point, if my unfiltered candor had indeed erected too many barriers over the years, isolating me further from the sibling bond Sarah and I had once forged in those innocent days of backyard adventures and whispered confidences under the covers during thunderstorms. That evening, as twilight descended and the city sounds of distant traffic hummed faintly through my windows, I uncorked a bottle of inexpensive Merlot and sifted through faded digital albums on my laptop, lingering on snapshots of Sarah and me as wide-eyed girls constructing elaborate blanket forts in the overgrown yard of our childhood home. Images that stirred a bittersweet ache and compelled me to confront the possibility that boycotting her wedding was less about self-preservation and more about shielding myself from yet another round of familial dismissal, even if it meant forfeiting the chance to witness what ought to have been her triumphant milestone amid the swirl of vows and celebrations. Seeking some measure of reclamation, I crafted a discreet post on my social media feed, alluding vaguely to family gatherings that summon drama without extending the invitation, Careful not to tag anyone directly, but confident that my network of cousins and acquaintances would decipher the subtext, and by the following morning, as I sipped my routine espresso amid the clutter of design sketches scattered across my drafting table, the influx of supportive likes and empathetic comments from those peripheral relatives provided a fleeting sense of vindication. A subtle act of defiance that elicited a wry chuckle from me at its inherent pettiness, while simultaneously affirming that I remained relevant beyond their narrow exclusions. Unbeknownst to me in that fragile hour of quiet triumph, however, my phone would soon interrupt the calm with an incoming call from an unrecognized number, and upon answering with a cautious hello, Sarah's voice emerged tentative and laced with an undercurrent of urgency, murmuring that she urgently needed to discuss an incident from the reception that had unraveled in ways she could scarcely articulate, yet before she could elaborate further, the connection fractured into static and severed. Abruptly, plunging me into a vortex of apprehension as I clutched the device, my pulse accelerating with the dawning realization that my deliberate absence might have precipitated consequences far graver than any anticipated drama, propelling me toward an unraveling truth that would demand I confront the shadows I had long suspected lurked within our family's polished facade. That abrupt disconnection from Sarah's call echoed in my ears long after I had redialed her number repeatedly, only to be met with the unrelenting beep of voicemail, each failed attempt amplifying the knot of unease twisting deeper within my chest as I wandered restlessly through the dim confines of my apartment, the walls closing in with memories of our fractured sisterhood that had begun to fray even before the wedding invitation debacle, rooted in those early signs of Mark's possessiveness. During their courtship, when he had monopolized her time at family barbecues, shooting sidelong glares at any male relative who dared converse with her too long. Behaviors I had chalked up to overzealous affection at the time, but now replayed in my mind with a sharper, more ominous clarity that made me question how I could have let distance and resentment blind me to the potential peril she faced. Desperate for distraction amid the mounting anxiety, I settled onto the sagging couch with a bowl of leftover stir-fry and the remote in hand, flipping channels in a futile bid to drown out the what-ifs swirling through my thoughts, until the glow of the television screen captured my attention with the urgent ticker scrolling across the bottom, announcing a late-breaking update on a disturbance at a prominent Chicago wedding reception. The kind of event that local stations loved to sensationalize for its blend of glamour and scandal, and as the anchor's voice cut through the commercial break, with her polished inflection detailing how police had responded to reports of an altercation amid the toasts and dances, shaky cell phone footage began to play that froze me in place, depicting the lavish ballroom in pandemonium with elegantly dressed guests recoiling in horror while servers paused mid-stride, their trays forgotten, and there at the epicenter stood Mark, his features contorted into a mask of unrestrained fury as he raised his hand and delivered a resounding slap across Sarah's face, the impact reverberating through the speakers like a thunderclap that sent her staggering backward into a nearby table, silverware clattering to the floor as a few brave souls rushed forward while others fumbled for their devices to document the unfolding horror rather than intervene, the scene capturing in stark, unflinching detail the unraveling of what had been billed as the perfect union for our upwardly mobile family. My remote slipped from numb fingers onto the carpet as a surge of nausea propelled me to my feet, the half-eaten meal abandoned while I replayed the clip on mute, scrutinizing every frame for context. The way Sarah's expression shifted from startled surprise to a resigned defeat that pierced my heart more painfully than the violence itself, confirming the insidious patterns I had suspected during holiday visits when she would arrive with explanations for minor injuries like a twisted ankle from dancing too enthusiastically or a headache from wedding stress excuses that our parents had eagerly endorsed to preserve the narrative of domestic bliss, their reluctance to probe deeper a reflection of the generational stoicism that had silenced similar issues in their own marriage, leaving me as the sole outlier willing to voice dissent yet dismissed as the perpetual alarmist. Overwhelmed by a cocktail of rage, remorse, and helplessness, I paced the living room with fists clenched, berating myself for honoring their exclusion by staying away when my instincts had screamed to show up and shield her from the facade crumbling before my eyes. The news segment wrapping up with vague assurances that no formal charges had been filed yet as the couple sought counseling, a euphemism that only fueled my determination to unearth the truths they buried beneath layers of denial and decorum. Seizing my laptop from the side table amid the scattered cushions, I launched into a frenzied online investigation, cross-referencing Mark's name with archived articles from his alma mater in Bloomington, where whispers of a dormitory altercation during his junior year had been hushed up through administrative channels, and by the time the clock neared midnight, I had pieced together fragments from obscure blogs and public records hinting at a pattern of explosive outbursts masked by professional success, including a restraining order petition that his ex had withdrawn under financial pressure, revelations that painted him not as a one-off offender but a calculated manipulator who thrived on control, much like the subtle ways he had isolated Sarah from her friends over the past year, a tactic I now recognized as classic entrapment from the self-help books I had devoured post-divorce. Channeling the fury into action, I composed an anonymous email to the investigative reporter whose byline had appeared on the initial story, attaching redacted screenshots of those findings along with a pointed note urging them to connect the dots beyond the surface-level drama. My cursor hesitating only briefly over the send button before I clicked it with an exhale that carried the weight of long-suppressed vindication. The act serving as a sly under-the-radar retaliation that bypassed direct confrontation while sowing seeds of accountability in the public domain. A maneuver that brought a grim smile to my lips as I envisioned the newsroom buzzing with fresh leads and my family's composure fracturing under the glare of scrutiny they so desperately avoided. Leaning back against the headboard after retreating to bed with the adrenaline still coursing, I refreshed my inbox compulsively until a notification chimed from an unexpected source. My former sorority sister from college who had relocated to the Windy City and caught wind of the broadcast through mutual connections. Her message detailing insider knowledge from Mark's professional circle about a hushed workplace complaint involving aggressive emails to a female colleague, but as I scrolled eagerly through the attachments she promised, the email truncated abruptly mid-paragraph, as though interrupted by an urgent call or second thoughts, suspending me in a tense limbo where the partial disclosures tantalized with the promise of deeper exposures yet withheld the full arsenal needed to dismantle the lies, compelling me to stare at the screen into the wee hours while the uncertainty gnawed relentlessly at the edges of my resolve. The truncated email from Lisa, my old sorority sister, lingered like an unfinished puzzle on my nightstand tablet where I had left it charging overnight, its partial revelations about Mark's workplace indiscretions fueling a sleepless vigil that carried me into the pale dawn light filtering through the thin curtains of my bedroom, compelling me to rise with a resolve hardened by the night's revelations and brew a pot of strong black coffee that I sipped methodically while poring over the fragments she had shared. Those aggressive email exchanges redacted, but damning in their implication of a pattern of intimidation that extended beyond personal relationships into his professional life as an accountant at a mid-sized firm in the Loop. Behaviors that echoed the controlling undercurrents I had observed during family visits when he would critique Sarah's outfit choices or itinerary plans with a sharpness disguised as helpful advice, a dynamic our parents had normalized as mere husbandly concern while I bit my tongue to avoid being labeled the meddlesome sister once again. As the morning progressed with the distant hum of Milwaukee traffic underscoring my isolation, I delved deeper into the digital archives, pulling up shared family cloud drives that held years of photos and videos from gatherings I had attended sporadically since my divorce, uploading batches to my photo editor software to enhance details and scrutinize for overlooked signs, my cursor lingering on a series of images from Sarah's bridal shower 6 months prior where in one candid shot Mark's hand rested possessively on her shoulder, the imprint of his fingers pressing just a fraction too firmly against her collarbone, suggesting a restraint that bordered on restraint. A subtle visual cue that now screamed of habitual dominance when paired with the diary excerpts Jenna had mentioned in passing during our last tense phone call, though I pushed aside the urge to contact her directly, fearing it might alert the family grapevine that I was piecing together their carefully curated narrative of marital harmony. Hours melted away amid the glow of multiple screens with empty yogurt containers accumulating on my desk as proxies for meals. And when Lisa finally responded with the complete file attachments, unredacted this time, detailing a formal HR complaint from 2 years earlier, where Mark had been reprimanded for cornering a junior analyst in the break room over a minor reporting error, his voice escalating to threats that prompted her to seek a transfer, the documents corroborated by witness statements that described his charm evaporating into coercion under stress. A profile that mirrored the explosive incident captured on that wedding clip and ignited a firestorm of righteous indignation within me, because this wasn't isolated volatility, but a systemic issue our family had enabled through their willful blindness, much like how they had downplayed my ex-husband's affairs as midlife wanderings. Rather than betrayals deserving confrontation, leaving Sarah to potentially repeat the cycle unless someone disrupted the status quo with unflinching exposure. Empowered by these concrete proofs, yet mindful of the backlash that direct involvement might invite given my already tarnished standing as the drama instigator, I curated a selection of the least inflammatory excerpts, anonymizing all identifiers, and forwarded them into the dormant family group chat that had fallen silent since the wedding fallout, prefacing the leak with an innocuous query like, "Ever wonder what else lurks behind closed doors?" That masked my hand while provoking their collective unease, the messages delivering with a series of rapid read receipts from my aunt's uncles and even Dad, whose typing indicator flickered erratically before vanishing. A calculated act of subversion that yielded an immediate undercurrent of tension as replies trickled in with defensive deflections about privacy and jumping to conclusions. The witty precision of my anonymous prod eliciting a private smirk of satisfaction, because it forced them to grapple with the inconsistencies in their protective facade without me shouldering the full brunt of accusation. A revenge served cold and indirect that chipped away at the walls they had built around Sarah's vulnerability. As the afternoon sun slanted across the room, casting elongated shadows that danced with my growing impatience, my phone screen illuminated with an incoming call from Sarah herself, her contact photo a faded image from our last joint vacation showing her laughing freely before Mark's influence had dimmed that spark. And when I answered, her voice emerged fractured by quiet sobs that conveyed a depth of despair I hadn't heard since our teenage arguments over shared secrets, confiding haltingly that the slap at the reception was merely the visible fracture in a foundation riddled with hidden cracks, including isolated episodes of shoving during arguments over finances or his jealousy of her lingering friendships, admissions she had withheld to shield the family from scandal, but now could no longer contain, as Mark's promises of change rang increasingly hollow in the aftermath of public humiliation. Pleading for my intervention because the weight of isolation pressed too heavily without an ally to validate her emerging doubts. I leaned into the conversation, offering assurances laced with gentle probing about the diary entries and whether she had preserved any physical evidence, like those high-neck sweaters that concealed more than fashion choices. My words weaving support with subtle encouragement to document everything for potential legal recourse. Yet as she began to describe a recent confrontation where Mark had smashed a vase in a fit over her hesitation to delete social media contacts, the line grew muffled with what sounded like approaching footsteps and hurried whispers, culminating in her urgent hiss that someone was coming and she had to hang up immediately, the call ending on that precipice of disclosure, leaving me frozen in my chair with the phone pressed to my ear as if willing her voice to return, while a sharp knock reverberated through my front door, revealing through the peephole the stern visage of my cousin Jenna, who had driven up unannounced, her expression a storm cloud of confrontation, demanding answers about the leaked documents, because the family meeting had devolved into chaos, with accusations flying, and Sarah vanishing into the night, her sudden appearance thrusting me into a maelstrom where alliances blurred and the true cost of my revelations loomed inescapably close. Jenna's insistent pounding on my door reverberated through the quiet apartment like an unwelcome alarm, jolting me from the fragile thread of connection with Sarah that had just snapped, her face appearing distorted yet unmistakably furious through the peephole as she shifted her weight impatiently on the welcome mat. The faint scent of rain from her hurried drive up from the suburbs already seeping under the frame while I hesitated for a split second, weighing the risks of opening up to someone who had historically aligned with the family's code of silence during crises like the one following my divorce, when she had mediated between me and our aunts with platitudes about forgiveness rather than acknowledging the raw betrayal at its core. But curiosity mingled with a desperate need for solidarity propelled me to twist the lock and pull the door inward, revealing her disheveled appearance in a rumpled blouse and jeans streaked with what looked like coffee spills from a tense road trip. Her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded immediate reckoning about the anonymous leaks circulating through family channels that had escalated the wedding aftermath into a full-blown inquisition at my parents' hastily convened meeting in their beige-walled living room overlooking the manicured lawn. She brushed past me without invitation into the cluttered space where takeout boxes from my investigative marathon still littered the coffee table, launching into a tirade laced with frustration about how the forwarded documents had ignited accusations among the relatives, with Uncle Ted speculating wildly about external saboteurs and Mom collapsing into tears over the tarnishing of Sarah's special day. Yet beneath the anger of vulnerability cracked through when she admitted to overhearing Mark berating Sarah in a side room during the rehearsal dinner the week before the wedding, his voice rising in possessive jealousy over her casual chat with a longtime friend from high school, a revelation she had suppressed to maintain the event's momentum, but now resurfaced as damning corroboration that aligned eerily with the patterns emerging from the HR files and forum whispers I had unearthed, prompting her to slump onto the couch with a sigh that carried the weight of her own marital compromises in a union to a bland executive who prioritized career over emotional depth, making her unexpectedly receptive to my side of the story when I recounted Sarah's interrupted call and the diary hints without fully disclosing my role in the leaks. Our conversation unfolded over hastily assembled mugs of herbal tea that steamed gently on the side table, bridging the chasm of years where we had drifted into polite estrangement since college graduations pulled us in different directions, with Jenna confiding fragments from her observations during bridal events, like the way Mark had isolated Sarah at the engagement party by monopolizing conversations and steering her away from group photos that included me, behaviors she had rationalized as protective enthusiasm but now viewed through the lens of control, especially after glimpsing a faint bruise on Sarah's wrist dismissed as a makeup trial gone wrong. Insights that wove a tapestry of subtle red flags our family had collectively ignored in favor of the fairy tale optics of a destination honeymoon and joint bank accounts symbolizing stability for women of our generation navigating the post-40 landscape of second chances and societal expectations. United by this shared epiphany and the urgency of Sarah's plea echoing in my mind, we devised a strategy to infiltrate the family's remedial brunch scheduled for the following morning at the upscale country club on the outskirts of Chicago, where Mark would undoubtedly perform his contrite routine to salvage his image among the golfing uncles and bridge-playing aunts, proposing that I accompany her under the guise of reconciliation while preparing a digital surprise in the form of a looped slideshow embedded with anonymized excerpts from the lawsuit documents and select family photos overlaid with ironic captions like "gripping moments that last too long" or "when toasts turn toxic." A multimedia Trojan horse I could splice into the venue's presentation system via a borrowed admin password from Jenna's club membership. The plan's cleverness lying in its plausible deniability as an innocuous tribute video that would subtly erode Mark's facade without overt confrontation, eliciting a conspiratorial grin from her as we mapped out timings over scribbled notes on a napkin, the act of collaboration infusing me with a buoyant satisfaction akin to outmaneuvering a difficult client in my design freelance world where wit often trumped brute force. As the evening waned with the sky deepening to indigo beyond the windows and Jenna preparing to crash on my spare futon with borrowed pajamas, my voicemail indicator blinked, insistently revealing a message from an unfamiliar Chicago area code that upon playback delivered Mark's voice smooth yet laced with underlying menace, warning me to cease my interference in their private affairs or face the consequences of alienating the entire family network he had so meticulously courted through professional connections and holiday schmoozing, the threat hanging heavy in the air like a storm front as Jenna overheard and paled, slightly urging caution. But before we could dissect its implications, my phone vibrated. with a text from Sarah herself declaring her intention to leave Mark definitively and requesting my immediate presence for support amid the emotional wreckage. Attached to a snapshot of her suitcase zipped shut beside the front door of their high-rise condo, the image's background blurred, but unmistakably alive with the distant wail of approaching sirens that hinted at an escalation I could scarcely anticipate, thrusting our nascent alliance into the heart of a confrontation where the lines between protector and provocateur blurred perilously under the gathering shadows of impending chaos. That harrowing text from Sarah, accompanied by the snapshot of her packed suitcase against the condo's entryway, with those ominous sirens piercing the urban night, propelled me into a frenzy of preparation, tossing essentials into my overnight bag while Jenna hovered nearby, her earlier resolve hardening into a steely partnership forged in the crucible of shared family disillusionment, the two of us exchanging determined glances as we coordinated our departure in her more reliable SUV for the hour long trek to Chicago, where the brunch loomed like a powder keg primed for ignition by our subversive slideshow that promised to shatter the veneer of reconciliation my parents had so desperately orchestrated to contain the scandal within whispered conversations, rather than the broader scrutiny of neighbors and colleagues who now buzzed with rumors from the viral clip. As we merged onto the interstate under a slate-gray sky threatening rain, the conversation veered into introspective territory, with Jenna voicing her own regrets about enabling the silence during her marriage's rough patches where her husband's workaholic tendencies had bordered on neglect, yet she had mirrored our family's script by prioritizing appearances over confrontation, a pattern that now made her question if Sarah's entrapment stemmed from the same inherited caution that had kept me at arm's length from intervening sooner, prompting me to share fragments from my divorce era when I had ignored early red flags like unexplained late nights and evasive texts in favor of preserving the life we had built, only to emerge scarred and skeptical of second chances for men like Mark, whose charm masked a volatility as predictable as Midwest thunderstorms. Midway through the drive, we pulled into a nondescript diner for a quick refuel, where over plates of eggs and toast heavy with the weight of impending drama, Jenna revealed more from Sarah's confidences gleaned during a late-night call the previous evening, detailing how Mark's jealousy had escalated post-engagement with demands to monitor her phone and limit outings under the guise of building trust, subtle erosions of autonomy that Sarah had confided in her diary, with entries alluding to my troublemaking intuition as both a warning and a comfort she wished she had heeded sooner, insights that twisted my gut with a mix of vindication and sorrow because they underscored how our sibling rift had inadvertently amplified her isolation, allowing the abuse to fester unchecked amid the wedding whirlwind of dress fittings and vendor calls that distracted from the bruises blooming beneath long sleeves. Arriving at the country club just as the brunch assembly filtered into the sunlit atrium adorned with fresh lilies and crisp linens, masking the undercurrent of tension in averted gazes and hushed tones, we slipped into seats at the periphery, blending with the extended kin, while Mark held court near the buffet, his posture exuding feigned remorse as he recounted the wedding mishap to sympathetic uncles as a heat-of-the-moment lapse induced by champagne and fatigue, a narrative that elicited nods from those invested in the status quo yet faltered when our pre-timed slideshow hijacked the overhead projector during the informal toast, cycling through innocuous family montages before segueing into those damning overlays with lawsuit snippets blurred for anonymity and photo enhancements highlighting Mark's overbearing grips paired with quips like, "Hold on tight" or "let go gracefully," that drew initial chuckles morphing into uncomfortable silences as the implications sank in, prompting aunts to clutch pearls and cousins to exchange wide-eyed glances, while my mother rose sputtering about technical glitches only for the sequence to loop, inescapably exposing the emperor's lack of clothes in a spectacle of witty subversion that left Mark's face draining of color, his attempts at interruption drowned out by the growing murmur of doubt. In the ensuing pandemonium, with servers halting service and relatives demanding explanations, Jenna and I maintained composed anonymity, slipping away to a side alcove where Sarah found us moments later, her eyes swollen from crying yet alight with a fierce clarity as she enveloped me in an embrace that bridged years of misunderstanding, confessing that the sirens in her photo had heralded police arrival after Mark's post-wedding rage had escalated to threats of self-harm to manipulate her return, a ploy unmasked by the diary evidence she had finally shared with responding officers, leading to his temporary detention for evaluation, while she gathered the courage to file for separation. Her words tumbling forth with gratitude for my indirect catalysts that had pierced the family's complicity even as she admitted the leaks had terrified her, initially fearing they would paint her as the victim in a petty narrative rather than empower her agency. As the brunch dissolved into fragmented clusters with my parents cornering us in the foyer, their faces etched with betrayal, accusing me of orchestrating the downfall of what they viewed as a salvageable union, a final confrontation unfolded, where Mark arrived uninvited, bursting through the doors with disheveled fury, only to be met by arriving officers tipped off anonymously by Jenna about the fresh threats, his bluster crumbling under the weight of accumulated proofs that painted him irrevocably as the architect of his isolation, the scene culminating in Sarah's resolute declaration of independence that silenced the room, though not without the sting of her aside to me, questioning if our revenges had liberated her or merely traded one cage for the uncertainty of rebuilding alone amid fractured kinships. Driving home days later with the adrenaline ebbed into reflective quiet, Sarah's parting text arrived on my phone, a poignant ambiguity that read, "You showed me the way out when I couldn't see it, but at what price to us all?" leaving me to ponder amid the passing billboards whether my interventions had truly severed the cycles of silence or merely reshaped them into new forms of division, inviting endless rumination on the delicate balance between fierce loyalty and the chaos of truth unveiled in families bound by blood yet divided by unspoken fears.